Hello, I'm Jill at engVid, and today we have a lesson on direct and indirect speech. So what do I mean by that? So this is whenever you're either talking about or you're writing about what somebody said. And there are two different ways of doing it. So you might be just having a conversation with a friend and you're telling them about a previous time you were with a person who was speaking and what they said. Or you could be writing something and you need to write down what somebody said. And there are two different ways of doing it. They're called direct speech and indirect or reported speech, whether you're speaking about it or writing it down. But here I'm showing you, obviously I've written some examples down, so this is written, but these could just as easily be spoken face to face with another person. Okay, so the first example here is the direct speech. He said, comma, quotation mark, I'm going to the office, full stop, quotation mark. So this is direct speech because you're quoting exactly the words the person said. Okay, so if you remember exactly what the person said, you can quote them. Sometimes people aren't quite sure, but they might say, oh, he said something like, and then put something in quotation marks, sort of approximately what they said. But usually between the quotation marks, also if you're writing an essay and you're quoting from another source with quotation marks, you can't change anything. You have to quote exactly what it is. So it is in quotation marks, it should really be exactly what the person said. But of course, if you can't remember what they said, or if you prefer to say it in a more indirect way, or reporting more loosely what the person said, you would say he said that he was going to the office, or you don't have to use that. That's why it's in brackets. He said he was going to the office. You don't have to use that little word that. It's a bit more formal to use that. So you can see the difference here is that there are no quotation marks because we're not quoting directly. It's just a sort of an approximation of what the person said. But you can also see that there's a difference in the tense, because at the time he said this, he was speaking in the present tense. He said, I am going now at this moment, I am going to the office. So he may have been answering a question. If the person said, oh, hello, John, where are you going? I'm going to the office. So he may have been answering a question, but in that moment, he's speaking in the present tense. So obviously you quote in the present tense. But in the indirect reported speech, you're talking about something that's happened in the past when you saw him. So he said he was going to the office. We've gone into the past tense here because it was in the past by the time you're talking about it. Okay. And then we'll find this all the way through the different examples. The tense has to change to go further back into the past. Right, so here's another example then. So the director said, quote, the meeting will begin at 2 p.m, unquote. So when people say this out loud, quote, unquote, that's quite a useful thing to know. Quote, unquote, beginning of quotation, end of quotation. right? So here the director is speaking in the future. The meeting will begin at 2 p.m. So maybe the director is speaking at 12 o'clock, lunchtime. You know, have your lunch, take your time. The meeting will begin at 2 p.m. Okay, so future tense. So how does that change if you then move to indirect reported speech? So the director said that the meeting would begin at 2 p.m. So we've gone from will, future, to would in the past. In much later now, later, probably after the meeting has taken place. Okay, and again, we've got that, but it's optional. The director said the meeting would begin at 2 p.m. It may be that everyone's sitting round the table waiting and it's 10 past 2. The director said the meeting would begin at 2 p.m. Well, why hasn't it started yet? Where is the director to start this meeting? So that's possible as well. That's the kind of context you could have for that. Okay, but there's the change from will to would there. Okay, and then another nice simple one, going from present to past. She said, quote, "I live in London," unquote. But then if you're reporting this later, indirectly, she said she lived in London. She said that she lived in London. That's what she said. Even if she still lives in London now, while you're speaking, the following day or the following week, she still lives in London, as far as you know, but it goes into the past tense because she said it in the past. So she said she lived in London. Okay, so from live present to lived past. Right. And then a slightly different one. We've got the present perfect here, and then it changes to the past perfect. So whatever tense you're in for the quotation, you have to go further back in the past for the indirect reported version. So the artist said, quote, I have finished the painting. And then in the indirect version, the artist said he had finished the painting. So we've gone from have finished to had finished. Okay. And then finally, another verb, modal verb. He said, quote, I can't swim. So if you've invited somebody to go swimming in the local swimming pool, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't swim. We'd better go and do something else, go for coffee or something instead. I can't swim. So then in reported speech, indirect speech, he said he couldn't swim. Can't and couldn't. So couldn't, could not is the past form of can. Can, could. Can't, couldn't. Okay. So, so this can be used either in speaking or in writing. So it sounds the same in speaking. Of course, the difference in writing is that you have to use all the punctuation and the quotation marks. So it's good to know, best to put a comma after said. Or you could have other verbs like he answered or he mentioned, different verbs, but said is the usual one. So it's important to know how to write it, the actual quotation marks, but in speaking as well, you would use the same change in the verbs going further back into the past when you're using the indirect speech. So just to clarify then all the tense changes that will happen depending on what tense you're using in the direct speech version, which tense you will use in the indirect version. So we have on the board here all the different tenses and how they will change from direct to indirect. So from present simple, it will go to past simple. And so if you were saying in the direct form, he said, quote, I'm busy. In the indirect version, you would say he said he was busy. So I am busy, present simple. He was busy, past simple. Okay, from am to was for the verb to be. Okay, so similarly for every tense, I'll just read through them. From the present continuous, you would change to the past continuous. From present perfect to past perfect. From present perfect continuous to past perfect continuous. From past simple to past perfect. From past continuous to past perfect continuous. Past perfect, there's no change. So if someone says, I had seen that. I had seen that. Yes, I had seen that. In the indirect speech, you'd say, he said that he had seen that. So it stays the same, okay? And then past perfect continuous, again, there's no change. So if someone says, she said, quotes, I had been cooking that day when there was a knock at the door. I had been cooking, and that's direct speech. And then in the indirect speech, she said that she had been cooking that day, so it stays the same. Okay. So then, as we saw on the previous board, will changes to would, can changes to could, must changes to had to, because you can't have must in the past form. You can have to and then had to, but if you use must, you then have to use had to in the indirect form, okay? And then may changes to might, and then all of these, might, ought to, could, should, and would, there's no change. So, for example, with might, she said, quotes, I might be going on holiday next week. Okay, I might be going on holiday next week. And then in the indirect, she said that she might be going on holiday next week or the following week, if you're talking about it sometime later. So that is an example of how all of these stay the same, except you change it from I to she or he. I might be going on holiday is the direct one. She said she might be going on holiday, or he said he might be going on holiday. So the personal pronoun changes, but not the verb. Okay, so I hope that's been a helpful explanation for you on the difference between direct and indirect speech, how you write it with quotation marks for direct, how you have to change the verb tense quite often with most of these, but some of them don't change. So if you'd like to test your knowledge on this, there's a quiz. If you'd like to go to the website, engvid.com, and try the quiz, see how you do. So thanks for watching, and hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.